Noah Bennett knew land didn't lie. He'd spent over a decade as a land surveyor, walking creeks, crawling through brush, measuring foundations with GPS rigs in one hand and legal codes in the other. He believed in lines, literal ones, property. Lines, legal boundaries, zoning permits. So when his father passed away and left him a 2.4-acre corner lot just outside the gated community of Hillside Haven, Noah thought he'd finally found peace. It was quiet. It was scenic. And most importantly, it was his. No HOA, no dues, no beige house codes, just trees, rocks, and opportunity. Noah didn't build much, just a small eco-cabin he designed himself. Solar roof, rain catchment, elevated garden beds. He wanted simplicity, silence, and soil. And for a few blissful weeks, he had it. Until the envelope came. It was hand-delivered, bearing the seal of Hillside Haven Homeowners Association. Noah frowned. He wasn't in Hillside Haven. His land lay just outside their designated boundary. He'd confirmed it a dozen times on official plat maps, and again with his own survey gear. Still, he opened the letter. Dear Mr. Bennett, in accordance with the Hillside Haven Future Community Integration Plan, Section 4B, your property has been identified as a target parcel for coordinated zoning and landscape alignment. We kindly request your participation in the alignment process, including aesthetic standardization, architectural review, and environmental transition compliance. Welcome to the extended family. Karen L. Withers, HOA President. Noah blinked, then laughed. Extended family. He didn't even like their lawn statues. The next morning, he drove into town and visited the county planning office. He pulled up the most recent zoning maps. His lot, parcel 339, clearly marked outside the HOA jurisdiction, but something was off. The future alignment overlay layer, uploaded just 2 months ago, showed a bold red border stretching past Hillside Haven's limits, right into his property. He requested the change history. The overlay had been added by Dean Coleman, listed as Municipal Technical Consultant. Noah had never heard of him. A quick database check showed that Dean didn't work for the county. He worked for Civic Core Developments LLC, a private contractor, and a known partner of the Hillside Haven HOA. That night, Noah sat on his porch, drinking black coffee and staring out over the line of trees that marked his southern boundary. Except, according to this overlay, those trees now belonged to them. He wasn't mad. He was intrigued. Because if there was one thing Noah Bennett hated more than disorder, it was people who redrew the map and hoped no one would notice. Noah didn't jump to conclusions. He measured them. So when he saw the newly updated overlay pushing the HOA boundary into his land, he didn't panic. He pulled out tools. The next morning, he set up his surveyor's tripod, laser level, and GNSS receiver. It took him 3 hours to re-verify what he already knew. His southern property line had not changed since 1987. The red oak in the corner still stood exactly 1.2 feet inside the legal edge. The iron stake, now covered in moss, remained untouched. But the overlay? It suggested he was already inside HOA bounds. That wasn't a mapping error. That was manipulation. Back at home, Noah dug through his father's filing cabinet. Metal, squeaky, heavy as a brick. Inside, he found what he was looking for. A certified survey from 1991, a handwritten zoning clearance issued by the county, and most importantly, a copy of the original plat map, sealed and notarized. It was clean, precise, unambiguous, and nothing like the one on the HOA website. Noah drove back to the county office and requested to speak with a zoning technician. He was directed to a desk, with a young man named Brian who looked like he drank 4 energy drinks before 10 a.m. Yeah, the overlays come from contractor submissions, Brian said. We don't verify unless there's a complaint. Noah leaned in. I'm filing one now. He placed both plat maps side by side. Look at the boundary lines, and the timestamp on the upload. Brian adjusted his glasses. This one has no matching permit trail. And it's been live for 2 months, Noah said. Whoa. Noah asked about Dean Coleman. Outsource tech, Brian muttered. But if he's the one modifying maps, that's weird. Those edits are supposed to go through our internal GIS review. They didn't. At least not this one. Brian promised to flag it for review. Noah knew what that meant. Paperwork purgatory. So, he took matters into his own hands. That night, he Googled Dean Coleman. His LinkedIn listed him as technical coordinator at Civic Core Developments, a firm known for urban expansion, land reclamation, and real estate alignment. One name kept popping up on their project list: Hillside Haven HOA. Specifically, Future Phase War, Green Buffer Housing Zone. Noah clicked the link. Phase Wars was a proposed eco-development, a nature-integrated micro-community, set to begin construction in 6 months. The center of the proposed site, directly on his inherited land. Noah leaned back in his chair. They weren't just redrawing lines, they were erasing ownership. He didn't sleep much that night. Instead, he made a call. "Hello?" a gravelly voice answered. "Harlan? It's Noah. Bennett, I'm Mark's son." There was a pause. "Mark Bennett. From the City Boundary Review Board?" "Yeah. Damn. That man saved my hide twice. Well, I think it's my turn now." Harlan Gray was retired, but still sharp as a tack. He'd once uncovered a zoning scandal that cost 3 city officials their jobs. When Noah explained what was happening, Harlan whistled. "They're using overlays as land claims? That's a new kind of slime. Can you help me prove it?" "I won't just help," Harlan said. "I'll bring the damn shovel." 2 days later, Harlan arrived with old field books, a thermal drone, and enough coffee to wake a corpse. Together, they compared the original zoning files with the HOA version. Harlan pointed out something Noah had missed. The slope adjustments. See here? The HOA's version includes an elevated erosion risk zone. That's fake. They added it so they could claim the land was underutilized green space. Even though I live on it. Exactly. They're trying to qualify your lot for rezone and reclamation. It's like eminent domain, but sneakier. Noah's hands clenched. They're stealing land. One line at a time. The drone soared high above the tree line, mapping every elevation change, every corner stake, every ditch. Noah and Harlan stood in the clearing, watching the thermal data load onto the tablet. "That's 3 degrees off from what the HOA overlay claims," Harlan muttered, zooming in. "Which means their topographic excuse is garbage." "Exactly," Noah said. "They invented the erosion risk to justify the expansion." "Classic move," Harlan nodded. "Change the terrain on paper, not on land." The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Over the next week, Noah and Harlan cross-checked 5 other properties bordering Hillside Haven. Each one had been labeled as Natural Buffer Zone in HOA proposals. 3 had already sold under pressure. 1 family had been fined into foreclosure. And the 5th, an elderly couple named the Barlows, were fighting off threats of code violations. Noah paid them a visit. The Barlows' land was old, overgrown, and beautiful. Vines twisted up wooden posts. The scent of honeysuckle filled the air. Mrs. Barlow opened the door with suspicion, until she saw Noah's surveyor badge and the map in his hand. "You're not from them?" "No, ma'am," he said gently. "I'm here because I think they're lying to you." They sat on the porch. Mr. Barlow, oxygen tank by his side, handed Noah a manila folder full of notices. $250 for overgrown vegetation, $600 for non-compliant fencing. A final warning letter threatening involuntary compliance intervention, all signed by the HOA, on property not legally in the HOA. "They told us we had no choice," Mrs. Barlow whispered. "Said the neighborhood voted on annexation." Noah clenched his jaw. "You do have a choice." And they lied. Back home, Noah compiled everything. His own property records, Harlan's elevation scans, HOA overlays Barlow's fines, HOA emails he'd managed to download from a public site. Thanks to Natalie, the reporter from the previous case. One email, buried in a forwarded chain, stood out. Phase 4 properties must be absorbed by Q3 to secure Civicor's development funding. Karen L. Withers, he forwarded it to Harlan. "They're not just planning. They're selling it before they own it." With enough evidence to choke a server, Noah made the next move. He didn't call a lawyer. He called Natalie Ward. Natalie remembered him from the Ava Monroe fire scandal. "Let me guess," she said. "Karen's back at it?" Worse, Noah said. She's not burning houses, she's erasing property lines. Natalie met him at a diner with her recorder rolling. Noah laid out the maps, documents, and the timeline. By the time he finished, she whistled. This is zoning fraud at the planning level, and the city hasn't stopped it. Because no one's screaming yet. I'm about to, Noah said. The next day, Natalie published a teaser article. Lines in the Dirt. How an HOA is quietly rewriting the map. It exploded. Hundreds of shares. Emails from other residents. One anonymous tip from inside Civic Corps. Karen approved preliminary lot divisions before the new boundary overlays were even uploaded. Noah printed every screenshot, every plat map, every quote, and hand-delivered the packet to the City Zoning Review Board. This isn't a complaint, he told them. It's a warning, because if this happens to me, it'll happen to anyone. Noah didn't sleep the night before the public hearing. He didn't need to. Every document was printed, every boundary line highlighted, every email cataloged. Natalie had prepped him with a media kit. Harlan had confirmed the GPS overlays twice. Truth was ready. Now it needed witnesses. The City Zoning Review Board held their monthly hearing in a modest civic hall, fluorescent lights, mismatched chairs, and a smell of lukewarm coffee. Usually 10 people showed up. This time, over 60 residents packed the room. Some brought maps, some brought citations, some brought anger. Karen Withers arrived in a coral-colored blazer and fake smile, trailed by 2 Civic Corps representatives. She didn't recognize Noah at first. But when she did, her face tightened. Mr. Bennett, one of the board members called. You may proceed. Noah walked to the projector and began. He didn't speak like a lawyer. He didn't need drama. He had precision. This is parcel 339, he said, pointing to the original plat map from 1991. Approved by the city. Surveyed by my father. Not under HOA jurisdiction. Click. This is the overlay added this year. Unauthorized, unverified, and pushed directly into private land. Click. This is Civic Corps' development pitch, already listing these parcels as available despite no legal acquisition. Click. And this, he paused, is an email from HOA President Karen Withers, directing staff to absorb Phase 4 properties before Q3. A ripple went through the crowd. Karen shifted in her seat. Natalie stood next. She showed excerpts from her article, testimony from former HOA board members, and drone footage of unpermitted land grading near the Barlow's property. Then came Harlan. He dropped a bomb. Ladies and gentlemen, I worked in municipal surveying for 40 years. What you're seeing here is a deliberate manipulation of terrain data. Falsified overlays, fabricated erosion zones, all to justify a fraudulent expansion plan. He looked directly at Karen. In my time, I've seen politicians lie, but I've never seen an HOA try to annex land through topographic forgery. Karen stood up. This is outrageous. These people have no idea how development works. One resident shouted, "Tell that to my $700 fine for an unpainted mailbox." Another, "You tried to seize my backyard for a community walkway." Karen raised her voice. "We're protecting property values." Noah stepped back up. "You're protecting your investments." Suddenly, a new figure entered the room. Detective Teresa Miles. She handed a folder to the city clerk and nodded at Noah. "Continue," she said. "We'll take statements after the hearing." By the end of the presentation, the room had transformed. What started as a zoning meeting had become a trial by truth. The board adjourned with a promise. A full audit would begin immediately. Karen stormed out, Civic Corps reps in tow. But this time, no one followed her. They followed Noah. Outside the hall, residents crowded around him. "Thank you. How can we help?" "I thought I was crazy. Turns out I was right." Even Mr. Barlow, oxygen tank and all, showed up with a small smile. "You made them see it, son." Back at home, Noah stood on the edge of his land, staring out at the trees. They were still there, still standing, still his, and for the first time, they weren't moving the lines anymore. Karen Withers wasn't used to losing, especially not to someone outside her HOA. She'd survived resident complaints, media storms, and even a petition for her removal once. But never like this. Never exposed in public, and never with evidence. She couldn't twist. So she did what desperate people do. She retaliated. 3 days after the hearing, Noah came home to find a wooden barricade built across his southern boundary. On it hung a laminated sign. Notice of Active Development Zone. Access restricted. Hillside Haven. Oh, there was no city permit number. No signature. No official backing. Just bold letters and intimidation. Noah walked to the barricade, tore the sign off, and called Deputy Riley Moore. Riley arrived within 20 minutes, his cruiser crunching gravel under the late afternoon sun. "Looks like she's escalating," he muttered, examining the sign. "Any idea who built this?" "Neighbors saw a Civic Corps truck late last night," Noah replied. Riley shook his head. "She's pushing her luck." The next morning, HOA volunteers appeared. Karen's loyalists. They set up cones, tape, and marked Noah's land as part of a temporary community pathway. Noah stood on his porch, filming the entire operation. One woman approached him with a clipboard. "You're trespassing on designated integration land," she said. "This is my land," he replied, holding up his deed. "And you're on camera." That night, Noah's solar panel wiring was cut. Security camera cables severed. He called it in. Again. Riley arrived with backup this time, and noted the fence tampering in his official report. "We're past citations now," Riley told him. "This is criminal vandalism." But Karen wasn't done. She filed a formal complaint with the city, accusing Noah of interfering with community development and delaying infrastructure alignment. It didn't go far, especially after Detective Miles subpoenaed Civic Corps' internal emails. One exchange surfaced between Karen and Dean Coleman. "Karen, the fence goes up, period. I don't care what plat he waves in court." Dean, "Should we loop the council in?" Karen, "No paper trail, no meetings, just build." That email became the final nail. With the board audit underway and public support on Noah's side, the city issued a cease and desist to HOA activities on Noah's land. Any further action would result in civil and possibly criminal charges. Karen's loyalists began to scatter. The Civic Corps project was suspended pending legal clarification, and the barricade? Noah tore it down with a crowbar, live-streamed on social media. "For those asking," he said into the camera, "this isn't defiance. This is reclaiming what was mine before they drew the wrong line." The barricade was gone. The tape had been removed. And for the first time in months, Noah could stand at the southern edge of his land, without someone trying to tell him it wasn't his. But the war wasn't over yet. Not until the entire blueprint collapsed. 1 week after the city's cease and desist, Detective Teresa Miles filed formal charges. Conspiracy to commit zoning fraud, forgery of official mapping overlays, abuse of authority, destruction of property. Karen Withers was arrested. At her office mid-call with Civic Corps, her pastel blazer looked less commanding under handcuffs. She screamed about fake lines and stubborn radicals. But no one listened. Because by now, the evidence spoke louder than her voice ever could. Civic Corps' development deal was suspended indefinitely. Their stock plummeted. Dean Coleman vanished from his public roles. The city launched a wider probe into HOA mapping practices across the county. What began as one man defending his trees had become a reckoning. Noah was offered interviews, podcast invites, even a speaking slot at a land rights convention. He declined most. He didn't want fame. He just wanted peace. The resident council of Hillside Haven dissolved its current board. A new leadership group was formed, this time voted openly, transparently. They issued a public apology to Noah and the other affected residents. Even the Barlows got their fines refunded, with interest. And on the very land HOA tried to seize, Noah planted a tree, a single oak, with a metal plate at its base that read, "This land remembers, even if maps forget." A month later, the community invited Noah to speak at a town hall, not to relive the fight, but to share what they'd learned. Stood at the podium, simple and calm. "I'm not a hero," he began. "I'm a guy who reads maps. That's it." Laughter. But sometimes it's not about being loud. It's about being exact. and refusing to let someone else redraw your story. He paused. Lines aren't just drawn on maps. They're drawn in fear, in silence, in policy. And they stay there until someone says, "That's far enough." Applause filled the room. After the meeting, people came up one by one. Your dad would be proud. You saved more than just your land. You reminded us that being small doesn't mean being powerless. Back home, Noah returned to his porch. The air smelled of pine and justice. He walked to his father's old survey station in the shed, hung up his original plat map, now fully verified, restored, and respected. Then he pinned a photo next to it. Drone shot, his land, clean and quiet. The oak tree at its center. No lines, no fences, just space, truth, and peace. Life lesson from the HOA blueprint. Not all battles are loud. Some are fought in silence, between boundary stakes and blueprint overlays, where the only weapon is the truth. Noah Bennett's story reminds us that control doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it wears a smile, drafts a plan, and quietly moves a line, hoping no one notices. But every false map depends on one thing, that we stay quiet. Noah didn't. He measured. He questioned. He stood firm. And when they tried to erase his rights with a pen, he redrew the line, with facts, with allies, and with courage. This story isn't just about land. It's about ownership, of truth, of space, of voice. And it proves that sometimes one person with the right tools and the right values can stop a machine much bigger than themselves, because when you stand your ground, literally and figuratively, you don't just protect what's yours. You remind the world it can't be taken. Love real stories of justice, bold takedowns, and HOA drama that hits hard? Subscribe to Tales of HOA Tyranny now. Every week we dig up the dirt, expose the lies, and bring you stories of people who fought, back, and won. Don't miss the next boundary crossing tale.